Good afternoon, everyone. This is Bill Schneider. I'm also joined online by Dr. Ashley Sieman. We're going to talk today about revisions to our state performance measures. And so we've recently closed out the recent cycle that went through 2018. So starting 2019 through 21, we're going to have a brand new cycle for state performance measures. And really our focus today is to go over these various measures and make sure that we answer any questions you might have. And along with that, we're also going to share some really statewide results associated with these metrics, kind of show which trends are going up versus down across these measures. And on various pages, you'll see a link to the preliminary report that includes the institutional results by measure. That link that's actually on the PowerPoint is wrong. There's actually a space in there, shouldn't be. But if you go to the actual chat box, you'll see the link that was shared by Eva that will go straight to that report. So really welcome you guys here, and we'll get started just talking about really what is our performance measure for student success report. So every summer we release this report out, and this really is kind of our accountability measure or accountability document for student outcomes for our colleges across the state. We use this to really not just inform college as far as really their progress within these measures, but really it's also to kind of share with the public information on our colleges and how they're performing from a student success perspective. And also a critical piece too is that we do have state monies that are associated with these measures. So this is associated with performance funding that's awarded each year to the colleges. Okay, so I mentioned before that every 3 years we start a new cycle. We had a performance measure review committee that worked last year on various recommendations for modification for our measures. These measures were approved by the President's Association in March and by our state board in April. So there are 7 measures. We have basic skills student progress. We have English or student success rate in English courses at our college level. The same for our math courses. We have a measure focused on first year progression, one on curriculum completion, another on licensure certification, and a final one on college transfer performance. Now, if these look familiar, it's because there's no difference between last year's measures as far as titles go compared to where we're going with this year's cycle. So what were the changes? So really the changes associated with these measures, one had to do with our cohort definitions. So our first-time cohorts have changed. They're not going to be a big change, but prior to this year, our first-time cohorts were associated with really those students who just started in the fall semester. So now we're looking at students that are enrolled in the fall semester, but they could have started in the summer or fall semester. So this won't impact all the measures, but those measures that are associated with looking at curriculum student progress and success, it would impact those. In addition, these various measures have the success criteria for each of the measures have changed, and we'll go through those various changes. And in addition to that, the time frames for success will change. There's some measures that we've actually expanded the time frame, but there's also others that we have reduced. And I do want to say too, as we go through this presentation, if you have any questions or about as we go through the slides, please type in your questions. Dr. Ashley Sieman is going to be monitoring those questions, and we can answer those as we go. So what were the big drivers as far as why we made changes to these measures? So one of the considerations we had was looking at our federal measures. So we talked about the cohort definition, that it's not exactly aligned with our curriculum first-time cohorts, but they are better aligned since we're inclusive of summers. In addition, as we talked about our basic skills measure, it is actually replicates what the federal measure is for basic skills. A lot of our discussion within committee also focused on career and college promise students. The past measures, there was concerns that many of our CCP students were adversely affecting the outcomes, especially with our early college students. So we worked to address those as well. But in addition to that, we also reviewed these measures, and we thought we could improve them by improving the methodologies. And also another consideration I mentioned before too was the actual time frame. So a lot of these measures we took in consideration the time frame in which we see the outcomes compared to when institutions can make an impact, and as close as we can really provide or have outcomes that are associated with the start of the students' involvement in college and progress, the better and really more actionable that data is for the institutions. So, one thing within our performance measure report, you see a lot of colors. So a lot of you guys are familiar with these colors. We have colors that look at their green, yellow, red, black indicators, and a lot of questions that we get as far as how are these different colors defined and what do they mean, and how they calculated as far as the actual calculation associated with the various percentages. So pretty much the easiest way to really discuss this is really think about a normal distribution curve. So with a normal distribution curve, you have your mean, which is in the middle, and then you have various standard deviations. So when we set our excellence levels, which are green, they are levels that are one standard deviation above the mean. So when we look at the baseline, we're looking at 2 standard deviations below the mean. And the data that we use to drive these are based on historical data that we have. So if we have 2 years of data, we're looking at, since we have 58 colleges, we're looking at 116 different data points. And based on those data points is how we calculate the means and the various standard deviations. So the actual number of years we use for various measures really kind of associated with the number of years of data we have. So we go for anywhere from 1 to 3 years of historical data to kind of derive the baselines and excellence levels for the various measures. Now, one thing that's I think is also important to note is that while the green and the black levels never change during the 3-year cycle, the yellows and red will. So the yellows and red are really driven by what happened during the year. So if the statewide average per institution went up, you'll see the red kind of shift right, and you'll see the yellow get smaller. But if the actual statewide results declined, you'll see the red become a smaller proportion compared to yellow. So any questions before we actually take a deep dive into the various metrics? Okay, I don't see any typed in, so but like I said before, feel free to type those in as you have them. And okay, so we'll start with the basic skills student progress. So throughout these slides, you'll see various words that are crossed through, and you also see some new words. And what this shows is the old measure compared to new measure. So previously, we looked at educational functioning level within our basic skills and looked at a percentage of students who progressed. Now we're looking at what's called a measurable skills gain. So this is associated with periods of participation. So this is our only measure where we're not looking at actual individual student results. We're looking at individual results within a student. So a student could have multiple periods of participation throughout the year, up to 3, and we're looking at each of those and accounting for those successes. So looking at the actual methodology so we look at all the students during the program year and looking at their periods of participation, and looking at those periods of participation, what percent had at least one measurable skills gain, okay? And for our levels of success and baseline, we're approximately 51% and 24%. Now, I do want to note that you'll see this throughout within the report, and you'll also see within the presentation a lot of asterisks. We're still working through these various measures and finalizing. We're going to have some slight methodology change that might impact slightly, but we expect this approximately be where we end up falling as far as excellence levels and baseline levels. Okay. So there's a question that as far as looking at the excellence and baseline levels, whether they're fixed for 3 years. So they are fixed for every 3 years, and the only thing that will change is the actual statewide average. So statewide averages will shift, but the excellence baseline levels stay the same. Okay. So what is a measurable skill gain? So this is inclusive of looking at once, just like our previous measure, pre and post test. So seeing if they actually a student made an educational functional level gain within a period of participation. We'll also look at adult high school credit, and what's really, I think, probably the biggest difference between the old measure and new measure is the inclusion of high school equivalency. So prior to this year, we did not include adult secondary high students in this measure because they could not make a functional level gain, but they can get a high school equivalency. So now they are included in our cohorts, and we're tracking their periods of participation and whether or not they've actually achieved either a high school equivalency or the next component, a post-secondary enrollment. So that's also an additional change. If you have students that are enrolling in post-secondary, that's also counted as a success within basic skills student progress. Okay. And for setting our benchmarks for basic skills student progress, we've leveraged 1 year of data, so it's only based on the current year, and that's really based on how we transitioned our data collections to meet new federal requirements. So we did not have good enough historical data to really consistently assess this measure. So we're based on 17-18 data, and you can see statewide, our success rate was 39.9%. And if we look at the number of institutions that fall below the baseline and exceed the excellence level, we had 1 below the baseline, and we had 9 institutions that fell above the excellence level. Okay, so any questions on basic skills student progress? Okay, next measure is very consistent with the old measure. So the college level English course success, this is looking at your first time cohorts of those that are associate degree seeking and college transfer pathway students. And look at those students, what percent have a C or better in a college level English course within their first 3 years. This used to be 2 years, we transitioned 3 years. So I mentioned before considerations for early college, so that was a big driver in us expanding this measure as well as the next measure in math from 2 to 3 years. Okay, so there's a couple more questions here. I think there's a first question from Deborah Harlow as far as looking at post-secondary ed, only includes students who enrolled during LIS year. So my understanding is that is correct, so it's associated with that period of participation, so they have to be enrolled that year, and I'll let Ashley can jump in anytime she wants if she wants to say if I'm incorrect in an assessment.
Sure. Hi, everyone. This is Ashley. Bill is correct that the post-secondary enrollment gain is only given to the student if they exit the LEIS program and subsequently enroll in post-secondary enrollment prior to June 30th of that program year. And that post-secondary enrollment can be in curriculum or select CE courses, and those CE courses are those that meet for Tier A, 1, 2, or select 3 tier level courses that meet for 96 hours or more. We have a specific list that we match to for that post-secondary enrollment.
Okay, and there's another question asking for clarification between the average college percentage and system totals. So the average college percentage, and this is what we base the mean on that I mentioned before, it shifts from year to year. This is actually based on the actual success rate for each institution. So we add those up and divide by 58 to get the average institutional success rate. So that is the average college percentage. But looking at the system totals, this is looking at the entire population within North Carolina and looking at, of all of our students, what percent are successful. So one is looking at the average institution success rate, and the other is looking at the total population, looking at success rate. Ashley, you want to jump on the next one as far as, okay, so they're asking for a link for C course that count for post-secondary ed.
Sure. I'll drop that in the chat box, but it is on the CCR website, but I'll put that in the chat box here.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so what are the results associated with the English measure? Oh, sorry, I didn't. So going back to as far as the definition of, what's in the denominator, what's in the numerator for the English, I mentioned before, it's associate degree seeking college transfer pathway students, and we're looking for of those that in that cohort, the actual number that actually have a standard level grade A, B, C, or P, so those who pass with college level, which is 100 or above, within the 3 years. And for this measure, we have a statewide excellence level of 64.1% and a baseline of 36.6%. So now looking at historical changes, so this is a measure that we've seen statewide, increase in success rate. We're pretty confident that this has a lot to do with the multiple measures policy, which allowed more students to enroll in college level English courses than before without going through developmental requirements. So we've gone up from about 54% in 2012 cohort up to about 58% statewide for the 2014 cohort. Currently we have no colleges that fall below the baseline. Matter of fact, there's our minimum statewide is 41%, which is well exceeds the baseline level. Looking at the number who actually exceed the excellence level, there are 18 institutions that were beyond the excellence level for this measure. Okay, and now looking at math. So this is pretty much very consistent with the English measure. The only thing is for this one, we're looking at really college level math courses. And for this measure, we have a statewide excellence level of 42.7% and a baseline level of 17.7%. So just like the English measure, this one is one that's trending in the right direction, 32% in 2012 cohort, up to 36.7%, almost 37% for the 2014 cohort. Just like the English as well, we had no colleges that fell below the baseline, but we did have one that was at 19.4%. We had 13 colleges that exceeded the excellence level of 42.7%. Okay, so monitoring the chat before I go to the next measure. Ashley, you want to handle the one from Sherry?
I am trying to pull up the report to see what is, were you referencing the report or the slides? I think we answered the question, which was what counts as post-secondary enrollment already, but if we need further clarification, we can do that.
Okay. And there's also mentioned too that as far as assessing why there's an increase in English and math, they're looking at the CCP students' increase in population that, with their likelihood of being more successful in these courses, is also attributing to the English and math success rate. Okay, so we're going to shift over to first year progression. So this one is really a major overhaul of the previous measure. Previously, this was our 12 and 12 measure. So it looked at of those students who attempted at least 12 hours within their first academic year, what percent successfully completed 12 more of those hours. The committee decided to transition this measure from looking at an hour threshold to a persistence measure. So this is very much a traditional fall-to-fall persistence rate. So it's looking at, and I'll go to the next slide, which shows the definition, but really we're looking at all of our first-time credential-seeking students, and of those that are in the denominator, what percent either are still enrolled with us, enrolled at another post-secondary institution, or graduated prior to the fall term. And for this measure, we have an excellence level of 69.1% and a baseline of 53.7%. So we've also been trending in the right direction for this measure too. We had a big jump from the 14-15 cohort of 61% up to almost 65% in the 15-16 group. And then look at 16-17, we're almost at 66%. We had one college that fell below the baseline, and we had 10 colleges that exceed the excellence level. Okay, so before I move forward, any questions on, okay, so I see that Frank has a question as far as post-secondary institutions. So when we look at post-secondary enrollment, we leverage the National Student Clearinghouse. So we look nationally to see if they've enrolled at another institution. So another question here, when you say preliminary results for 17-8, does that, let's see.
I can take that one. So
okay.
For this new round of performance measures, 3 years, 19, 20, and 21, what we are presenting here today is the baseline data that we use to set the baseline and excellence levels for each of these measures. So for each measure, how far we were able to go back was a little bit different based on the available data. For example, for basic skills, our baseline data is from 17-18, and that's also actually the data that we're using for performance measures for the 19 year. So that is the outcome data that will be funded for 19 because that's the only data that was available. There were significant changes in our data collection processes and methodology that we didn't feel like we could go back and grab baseline data from previous years and have it be consistent. So for basic skills, we just used 1 year. But for the other measures, as Bill walks through this, you'll see that we often, where we were able to, we used 3 years worth of data. So we're going back to the previous 3 years to evaluate what the outcomes were that will set the baseline for the 19 report, the baseline and excellence levels. For the rest of the measures that you're seeing outside of basic skills, the data for this year's measure is not presented in the report because it's not yet available. So you are looking at the 3 years of historical data or 2 years, as the case may be, for some of the measures for setting those baselines.
And I should have mentioned before, too, that, really the purpose of the report in this presentation isn't really to assess where you are for funding purposes. It's really to help prepare colleges on the future measures and where they currently stand and kind of help them, prepare for next year's report. Okay, looking at curriculum completion. Now, previously, this was looking at a 6-year success rate. This one shifted down. I mentioned before, too, that there's been concerns that, the data that's associated really is not actionable because it went out too far. So it's really kind of hard to assess, what's, the institution results and trying to associate the various strategies and initiatives that are associated with success or non-successes within the institution. So we shift this back to a 4-year success rate. So still looking at graduation and transfer or still enrolled, but even the kind of threshold associated with success is still enrolled was actually increased from 36 to 42. So once again, we're looking at all of our first-time fall curriculum students. And, of those that are in the denominator, looking at, did they graduate? And when I say graduate, this could have been from us or elsewhere. Did they transfer to a university? And when I say university, I mean a 4-year college using National Student Clearinghouse. Or they still enrolled with us during the 4th academic year with at least 42 successful non-development hours. And for this measure, we have an excellence level of 50.9% and a baseline of 31.6%. Now looking at it, so for this measure, we leveraged 2 years of data. We're looking at the 12 cohort and the 13 cohort, and that increased from 42.8% up to 44.6%. We had 13 colleges that exceed the excellence level, and we had one college that barely missed the baseline of 31.6%. So there's a question going back to the first year progression measure from EVA. So the question about persistence, so they transferred to another community college to complete their AAS count as persisted. So first year progression they would. So that persistence measure is not just within your institution. It can be elsewhere. So if a student enrolled at another post-secondary and it's another community college, that would count as a success. But for curriculum completion, their status within 4 years that they transfer from one community college to another community college isn't necessarily a success, but a transfer from a community college to a 4-year would be counted as a success. Okay, so drilling down into these cohorts, we can see what the types of success are included. We can see that we had an increase in the actual percentage of students who were graduates but did not transfer. We also saw an increase of those who graduate and transfer. So if you combine those two groups, our total graduation rate increased from about, it looks like about 18% to about, now we're about at, I'm sorry, not 18%, about 21%, up to about close to 23%. So that's pretty good as far as graduation increasing. And if you look at the grad and transfer, which is purple, and combine it to the transfer not grad, that's our overall transfer rate. So we also saw increases in that group. That went from about, it looks like about 20% to about close, probably 22%. And we had a slight decline of those that actually were still enrolled, which is your yellow group there. So we have some more questions. So if a college is above the average 44.6%, they should be yellow, correct? So if they are, so not quite, so 44.6% represents our statewide totals. It's not the average institutional result. And I'd have to go back to report and see what the average institutional, actually I can go back to the previous slide. So where they'll be in yellow is the 45.5%. So since the 45.5% is the average institutional result, you'd have to meet that threshold to be yellow. Anything below that, you would be in red or black. Okay, so we talked about curriculum completion. Okay, so the next one is one that we still not finalized. Where we've been working on the license certification passing rate. Now, the committee is recommending that historically we looked at first-time test takers. So for students who take a license certification exam, do they pass on that first attempt? So if they do, then they become a success. They don't, then they're not a success. What the committee is looking at is, does a student actually ever succeed within a certain time frame a license certification? So if it's on their second or third attempt and they pass, they would like to see those students count as a success. We've been working with various licensure agencies trying to see what their ability is to do through various methodologies. And I think pretty soon we're actually going to come with actually recommendations as far as how we move forward with this measure. But at this time, we're still not ready yet to make that decision. Okay. Our last measure focuses on college transfer performance. This also was a pretty big change for us. Historically, this has been more of an academic threshold measure looking at grade point average. Previously, we're looking at the percentage of students who transfer, what percent have a GPA of at least 2.25. Now we're looking actually just like our previous first year progression measure, we're looking at a persistence measure. So we're looking at, of our transfer students, what percent are still enrolled at a four-year university or college the subsequent fall. So it's a fall-to-fall persistence rate for those at the university. And here's a various methodology, and it's very similar to before as far as who we're looking at. So we're looking at students who completed their associate degree or accumulate 30 hours with us, and they'd be articulated transfer credit hours. And we look at their persistence at the universities and four-year colleges. For this measure, we have a statewide excellence level of 88.9% and a baseline of 72.8%. And I see there's a question about access transfer GPA dashboard data. So if you go to the UNC site, they have dashboards there. So the UNC General Administration site has various dashboards that are associated with various things like enrollment, like graduation. One of those is transfer GPA. So it will not be included in our dashboard, but they're still accessible within UNC site. So there's another question about what we said about licensure pass rates. So what the committee like to see is for us to transition to looking at whether or not a student passed a licensure during 1 year compared to previously where we looked at did they pass on their first attempt. So if a student takes an exam 23 times, passes on their 23rd attempt, they'd be counted as a success if we looked across all their attempts. But currently, we've historically only looked at the first attempt. So the question from Sherry, counting students in a transfer pathway or our AS. So if we're looking at the transfer measure, we're looking at all of our students who earn an associate degree or have accumulated 30 hours. It doesn't matter if they got an AAS, an AA, an AFA. It doesn't matter what degree, and it doesn't matter. It's these students as well if they had 30 transfer hours, regardless of whether or not they're on a transfer pathway, CT pathway. So it's really indifferent. All that matters is did they complete an associate degree, or did they at least have 30 articulated hours?
And again, just as a reminder, when we're looking at hours for a measure like this one, we're looking at any hours that they earned across the system, not just hours earned within an institution.
Okay, and looking at our success rates, this measure's actually been on a slight decline. 13-14, we had about 85.5%, and now it's down to about 84% in the 15-16 group. So for this measure, we had 2 institutions below the baseline, and we only had 2 institutions above the excellence level. So we are happy to go back and answer any question you have about the methodologies. Or we can take those offline if you'd like to email me or Ashley. Actually, probably best to email rpm@nccommunitycolleges.edu. That way, me and Ashley will get your questions, but we're also happy to answer any questions you have right now. And I think we'll go ahead and just go ahead and put the phone on unmute if you want to speak up. Oh, and if you're on the phone, you want to speak, you still have to push. What do you say, JJ? Star 6. So there's I saw a question from Elaine. She asked on the transfer measure, what reflects the change from 2.0 to 2.25? So previously, I guess that's been about 4 years ago when we did the last review, we actually increased that threshold from 2 to 2.25. But of course now that threshold does not matter. There is no changes in the performance funding calculations. Those methods are still the same as far as looking at the benchmarks, looking at the baselines, excellence levels, and the institutional results in comparison. So I see another question. You guys are going pretty fast now. Okay, so new methodology, historical data. So the historical data that's accessible is through the report. So we only go back to 1, 2, or 3 years, depending on the measures. So that's the historical data we have available. And I see Janice has a question about preliminary report not working. We recognized that earlier on in the presentation. There's actually a link above in the actual conversation that has the correct link. There was an additional space that was unnecessary in the link within the presentation. As far as decision on licensure pass rate, I would hope before Thanksgiving we'd actually have a final decision. So the measures themselves outside licensure are final. So the actual where we're going to be as far as the actual baselines and success levels, those might change, but I would expect probably slightly. And I think when we're able to have this final as far as percentage that are official, we'll get something out, and hopefully we'll have some once again probably by Thanksgiving. So next question is, are CCP students included in the first year progression? So for first year progression, all of our students that are non-special credit students are included in the cohort. So they would be, so CCP students are included. Okay. Any more questions? All right, well, not hearing any more questions. Like I said, feel free to reach out to me and Ashley at rpm@nccommunitycolleges.edu, and we'll be happy to follow up with you. Without any, I appreciate you guys joining us, and hopefully provide a little bit of clarity as far as how we're moving forward these state measures.